So the purpose of this workshop is to just share some experiences and some thinking, and I mean share across the whole group, about how best to talk to people about transition, to explore together what works well when it comes to engaging people's interests and then inspiring them to take action. Those sort of two things, getting people interested and then actually getting people to the point of wanting to act. So the focus is on that engagement with new audiences, with people that are new to transition. If that isn't the workshop that you thought you signed up for, feel free to gently slope off. We won't be offended. And what we're going to do, there's some bits later that we're going to do to explore some of the thinking that we've been doing within Transition Network. We're going to start with a story, because actually all good communication happens in the form of a story. So we thought we'd just tell you a story and then discuss a bit together what was interesting about the way that story was told. So, Rob, over to you.
Thank you. So, in the session after this, I'm doing a talk about a project that we're doing called 21 Transition Stories for COP21. So Transition Network put out a call for people to send in stories that we could then take to Paris in December to contribute a transition perspective on some of those things. So I wanted to share with you one of those stories that people have sent in, which comes from Brussels. And if there are people here who are part of this project who know it far better than I do, please feel free to say, no, it wasn't like that at all. So this is in the middle of Brussels, in a place, a district called 1000 Brussels. And this is a street right in the middle, mostly apartments. And this is the red light district area in Brussels. And they have lots of problem with prostitution, and people living in the flats come down and find condoms in the doorway and all sorts of stuff going on. And the transition group had been going for a little while, and they had done a kind of a free market where they would give things away to people. They had done various things. But then their local council came up with the idea that we could block the street off in the middle. If we block the street off in the middle, people can't drive their cars up and down, people can't curb crawl in the street. So the council just proposed to make some big blocks in the middle of the street. So the transition group met and said, I think we can do a little bit better than that. So the transition group said, well, why don't we make a garden? We could make some raised beds, we could grow food in the street. The council said, fantastic. It took about 10 months then to get all the legal stuff in place for them to be able to do that. And then the people came out with their families, with their children, and they built the beds. And mostly from kind of reclaimed materials. The council gave them some money and some compost and that kind of thing. But the people in the street, the people in the apartments, came out and built the beds and made the beds happen. There are 13 beds, and each one belongs to a different family in a different apartment. Do come in. Hello. Each one belongs to a different family in a different apartment, and they say one of the lovely things about it is every family gardens in a different way. So one person's patch is very wild, another person's patch is very ordered and very neat, and now it's all planted up. And actually, like many stories of transition, it's about much more than just the thing itself. It's not just about a garden, it's about what it then creates, how it brings people together. People said, actually now, people have something to talk to each other about in the street that they never had before. Children, they said, as soon as you go out and you start working, very soon you're surrounded by little kids who want to come in and play and have something to talk about. That never really happened before the garden was put into place. And I talked to a man called Sébastien Mathieu, who's one of the people who kind of coordinated the garden, and he said, could we have done this project before transition came into our lives? I don't think we would. It's 1.5 years. We've all been talking about transition almost every week, and it's very quickly changed a lot of things in our lives. For me, I stopped working a full week, and I now work 3.5 days a week. I would never have done that if I wasn't thinking about transition and about the future. And for me, a lot of what I do is going around and telling stories about what transition people are doing, and kind of gathering stories up and passing them on. And for me, there's a sort of a real quality to a lot of those stories, which is about people who, like in many stories, like the Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, the people who start out thinking, we could never do that, we could never do anything very much, and then taking those steps, and then things start to change, and then seeing other things that were completely unexpected do come in. That kind of serendipity that when you start to do, other things begin to come into the story. And actually this garden is now starting to inspire people on other streets to do the same, and the way they're working is as soon as 13 people in a street will sign up that they would look after one of these spaces, then they'll go and then they'll make another one. So it's not just something that's happening in the street, it starts to become something that is infectious and can move on to other places. My friends who are here from Brussels, have I kind of genuinely got that story roughly correct? Yeah. Good. Phew.
Thanks, Rob. Stand up if you want. We're not going to have an in-depth discussion of that particular story, but just to get a few reactions from amongst the group, how did you find yourself responding to that story? Any words that people want to come up with in terms of your response as you listen?
Very positive.
Positive?
Inspired.
Inspired?
Heartful.
Heartful?
Imaginative.
Imaginative?
Welcome on.
Sorry?
I was analysing it. Sort of analysing.
Analysing.
See what I take from it.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Sorry, so which are the bits that are interesting?
Yeah, how can I relate this to my life? What's it got to do with me?
Nice.
So thinking about it in that time.
Nice. Sorry, there was something over here.
New possibilities and new fallout.
inspiration.
So, and people have largely go. Yeah.
I like the idea of the 13 people, because this is a point that we've reached in the town where I am, where the council's saying you need a certain number of people to take responsibility. So I like the number 13. I think it's a good group dynamic.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you're telling stories that some bits of real sort of fact like that, rooted in reality, are really reassuring for people. It's one of the things I notice a lot when you tell stories, Rob, that you get some real facts right. You name people, you say the people involved, you get dates right. And that actually it feels reassuring then of, this is a real story that I'm listening to.
So
Joe?
a quick one, just a photograph of a group working. I think that tells a lot. So right, it's not just making it up. Maybe I'm just a visual person. But, there really is a group and they all look different shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
I think that makes it manifest a bit.
More, yes, in the chair?
I would like to have had some challenges, more challenges. So I always find that makes it more real to me, because they talk about challenges.
Interesting. So that sort of sense of it all being easy can be a bit off-putting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, over there.
As a herbalist and a confirmed plant person, I believe that the plants communicate with us, and you couldn't have picked a better medium to bring people together than the plants.
Yes.
I'm slightly concerned for the prostitutes. I mean, did they want to work there?
Oh yes, I
How did
forgot
this
that bit of the
affect their
story.
life?
What's the bit?
That bit of the story. So what they found was that then he put it really beautifully. He said we didn't do this project because we were against the girls. They talked about the girls. So we didn't do this project because of that, but actually when this happened, he said we didn't really see them so much anymore. But sometimes they would kind of call they would pass by. But it was just something. It just sort of shifted the dynamics somehow. But they didn't. Yeah, I don't know. So that was it really.
It's interesting though, isn't it? There is a thing about a story about who are the invisible people in it, and who are the people where there might be an impact.
And how were they involved, and were they consulted?
Yeah, really nice. Thank you.
And tying up all the threads. Because we started with prostitutes and we wanted to know what happened to them.
Unfortunately, I can't say they are all now committed gardeners. Set up their own urban agriculture cooperative. Might be. They're not quite there yet.
It's like you reclaimed the area for the community. especially during the daytime.
Yeah.
Or at night, I don't know, but
I think the imagery of the children appearing is quite powerful, because many of us have lived in cities where you don't talk to your neighbour anymore. I've lived in London, Hong Kong, and all sorts of cities, and it'd be great to see more children coming up to you.
Yes.
And it's one of the things, I mean, when we were talking about this with Ainsley, our new conflict expert, and one of the things she was really emphasising that felt really important to me was that bringing in the personal. And actually, she really recommends bringing it in right at the beginning of the story, and then as others have been saying, having an arc where we come back to and what was the impact on that person. And particularly people when they're talking about their children, their family, what this has meant for them personally, that there's something about speaking about that either for yourself or on behalf, saying this is what happened to this person. There's something about that for your audience then gets them to sort of engage as a whole person, not just their head and not just their business mind if they're coming as a business person, or their politician's mind if they're coming as a politician, but actually as a whole person who has family they care about, and really starts to engage in a much deeper way. Sorry, there was more. There's somebody over there, yeah?
I think it's very interesting to hear that the project, the transition project, really started in response to a problem.
Yeah.
The problem being the prostitution and so forth. And it sounds as though it wouldn't have happened if that problem hadn't been there as a kind of trigger, which is quite interesting. And I wonder whether, turning that on its head, one could almost say that the best way, or one way, to initiate a successful transition project which gathers momentum is finding a problem of some sort like this that needs to be solved and providing a solution through transition.
Really nice, interesting. There's lots to pick up on there, and I think we'll come back to some of what you were saying, because one of the questions for us is about where you position the problem that we're responding to, and what you're talking about there is a problem locally that is a really good way of engaging people locally with something that they recognise as an issue they'd like to get sorted. Yeah, thank you. I think you were next, and then I'll come to you.
The idea that small is beautiful. I like the scale. We're not in a story where it ended up with a big forest in Brussels. The project is there with a real urban scale. Small is beautiful.
So something about it feeling manageable.
Yeah.
In terms of then maybe empowering other people that they could do something similar, as it doesn't feel overwhelming. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So initially, so it was the council who said, let's stop this problem, let's just fix it with something simple. But then the transition group said, no, let's actually value add it, let's have multiple functions out of it. So it's like, it was piggybacking something which the authority figures were already dealing with, but adding to it and embellishing it. Yeah.
I think putting the thing in where you say, could this happen, posing the question, could this happen without transition is important. Because then I thought, actually, could it? Oh, maybe no. So it brings the importance of transition thinking into the story.
And there's quite a lot of examples that I've heard you tell, Rob, and others tell, of the capacity that transition creates in a community to then either respond to other problems or tackle other things. Yeah, so it's a good thing to come back to. Yes.
Interaction with the council is interesting because it sets them thinking. Maybe examples elsewhere in Brussels.
Yeah.
Other councils catch on.
Yeah.
Useful connection.
I'm going to move on, I think. Thank you for that. And I'm just going to show you what we thought we'd do with the rest of our time and see whether that feels right. So we wanted to just tell you a little bit about what we call the Transition Story Project. And this is what we thought we'd tell you. So Rob was going to talk a bit about where we started and why we saw a need for change. And then we're going to talk about what we did and where we've got to, and share where we've got to with you. and then sort of give you some time to talk in small groups about what that looks like, and give us a bit of a response. That's the sort of structure that we were thinking about for this really limited time. So it's only going to be a flavour, as all these workshops are. There was probably something I was supposed to say right at the beginning, wasn't I, Mike? Which is that Mike over there is filming this workshop. So I hope if there's anybody that doesn't want to be filmed, can you either sit behind the camera? It's a bit late to tell you this now, but you've only been filming us so far.
Yeah, just capturing audio. So.
Or feel free to go and say to Mike at the end that you don't want any, because we may well put this footage up on our website. So tell Mike if you don't want to be visible. Yeah, so that's what we thought we'd do. But it's really important, I think, that this is an interactive process. We know that lots of you have got really rich experience of telling stories and telling specifically the transition story. So I'm hoping we're going to create space all the way through for you to interact with us. It's a big group, so if I move us on, I hope you'll forgive me. Sorry, was that something coming up from somebody? No? Okay. So over to you, Rob, for the first couple of bits.
So back in the beginning, 2005, 2006, transition was, do come in. Yeah. Do come in if you'd like to. Sorry. Or leave if you'd like to. Both are absolutely fine. So back in 2005, 2006, when we started transition, it was very explicitly about a response. It's about a response to peak oil and climate change, and that was very much how we kind of framed it in all that early literature, in the transition handbook, in the stuff that we put out around that time. What we started to notice after a while was that actually that didn't work for everybody. We had people, when transition started in Brazil, they were saying, actually that whole peak oil thing doesn't really work for us, because as far as everyone around us is concerned, we're the new Saudi Arabia, and we're set to party big time, and no one wants to hear about climate transition. In the favelas in Sao Paulo, framing it around ending violence to women, social enterprise, community empowerment, and it still works. So that's really interesting, right? So other people who, and then in Spain and in Portugal, where the economic crisis was much, much more pressing, perceived to be much more pressing than those issues, actually they were doing transition in that setting with those as stated as being the drivers. And more people were starting to say, well, is it really? Is it also about this? Then we added in economics as one of the drivers. It's a response to peak oil climate change and the economic crisis.
Show the infographic.
Oh yeah. So we wrong way. So many of you will have seen this. This is our infographic that we produced a couple of years ago, which again is that idea of, transition is in response to, we do what we do in response to. Everybody who does transition in response to peak oil, climate change, the economy, the idea of economic growth, and actually most of you would then add other things onto that list. We do it in response to the epidemic of loneliness, we do it in response to a whole range of different things.
Social injustice.
Social injustice, we can just keep adding on, the list gets longer and longer and longer. And actually we started to notice, I started to notice that when I would be going out and talking to people about transition, it would kind of change. I would be, depending on who I was talking to, I would highlight different motivations, different drivers for doing it. We noticed that the way that we were talking about transition in things that we were writing, we were starting to frame it differently. And of course, as a website, the website sort of starts to, it kind of lags behind a bit the conversations that are going on and how all of us start to communicate transition. It's a bit like when we did the Transition Companion, and we thought, wouldn't it be a great idea if we had social enterprise as one of the ingredients? But actually then when we started going out to people and finding out what they were doing, they were already way ahead of it. One of the beautiful things for me of transition is that actually you set the inquiries running and it evolves, and you kind of keep an eye on how it's going. And a lot of people started coming to us and saying, actually we don't really talk about peak oil and climate change so much now, or maybe we talk about one and not the other. Then the perception was that actually peak oil is less of an issue than it was, and now the world's all this sort of oil around and all this kind of stuff. And so actually the question has really been for us, how do we do that? And of course, my experience of doing transition in Totnes was we did it for 2 or 3 years, based around the idea of we are about community resilience. We are about community resilience to peak oil and climate change. What we found was then that there were a certain section of people who got really involved in that, because those were the things that really motivated them. There were another whole kind of section of people who loved the community, who were motivated, who loved young people in the town, who loved doing projects in the town. They had lots of skills around business and innovation, but because climate change wasn't the thing that floated their boat, they didn't really get involved. So we started to change the messaging there maybe around 2010 to say we're about creating a new economy for this town, about creating new social enterprises and about creating a more diverse, resilient economy. All these other people started coming in who had previously sort of sat on the fence and said, yeah, we'll see, maybe. And that felt like a real kind of shift for us. There was something that really started to move when we made that move. So that's really been the kind of process for us, has been thinking, actually the more you talk to people and they communicate transition where they are, they point to different drivers, they point to different motivations, and transition has become so much more complex and so much differently kind of nuanced that actually we needed a bit of a rethink, which leads into the transition story process, which Sarah will then continue.
But I need to steal that.
With the same piece of
with the same piece of paper. Very low resource. So we decided we actually wanted to do a real project on this. And I think we had in mind that we knew that actually even within the small Transition Network team, we were probably telling the story very differently. And we thought, there's some strengths in that, having diversity, and there's some weaknesses that it can sound a bit, vague, and what is the message that we're trying to get out here. So we wanted to sort of review, well, how are we telling it internally as an organisation? But then we were also thinking, well, how can that serve the wider movement? So what we've been exploring how to do with this project is how to do it in a way where there's an ongoing conversation with people, both because we think the discussion is interesting, and just the discussion itself, what we're told from others, can sort of support people in what they're doing in their community. Just having a discussion like we are here about, well, how do we tell this story, gives people sort of ideas and a bit more resource to take back to their place. So what we did, we started by inviting people to send us positive and negative framings of transition. So just examples of what they'd seen that had really inspired them, and what they'd seen that had really put them off, and that they thought, actually, this is really not how we should be framing transition. And we put that request out and got some really interesting responses. And with everything we've done with this, we've really tried to do it in a way that is accessible beyond the UK. So it feels really interesting to get those responses in. So we put it out specifically in a way that people could answer in their own language and send us information in their own language. And we worked through the national hubs who are represented here at this conference, who have got who are the small groups of people who are supporting transition in different countries. So we got that information in. We've been working with a group of people here in the UK who are called the New Citizenship Project, whose whole piece is, their whole reason to be is about trying to find ways to communicate skillfully that shift people from being a consumer, a sort of passive recipient of goods. They're thinking about the choice and deciding which to purchase in the world, and being a sort of active citizen. So they're looking at the move from consumer to citizen. And they felt like a really interesting organisation to partner with. So we've been doing some work with them, and what we wanted to do today was just share with you where we've got to with it. And we're not seeing this as, so this is it, the definitive, we've worked out how to tell the story of transition. I sort of half wish we had done that, but there's no way that's where we've got to. But we wanted to say, well, this is where we've got to. How useful does it feel to you? How does it compare with what you're doing? And is this a conversation that we can continue? And particularly one of the things we're interested in doing in TN is, are the resources that we can then produce, if we have more of a sense of this is a useful story to tell, this is a useful way to tell the story, can we produce things that other people can use? We've had lots of requests for things like, well, a simple set of PowerPoints that we could use that were kept updated, that had accurate information in, would be really useful. So that's partly what we're sort of testing with you today. So, the work we did with this new citizenship project team, this was the analysis that they came up with, having looked at what we did. They said this is what they thought our sort of old story flow. This is how we have been telling the story. There are some huge problems out there. As Rob says, the way we've been describing the problems had changed, but we tended to start with the problem. And then we were saying, this is what we see in the world, don't panic, we can respond, there is something we can do, and here's how you can respond, here's how you can be part of it. And the sort of feeling was that was probably where we needed to start, that was what the transition movement was about. But the question that came up was, is this still appropriate? Does this still make sense? And it feels to me still a bit of an open question about the shift that needs to happen. So what's been proposed to us is that we should be moving to a story flow that looks something a bit more like this. And I'm going to read it to you because it's so a movement is building, something is happening. Here are the things all the different people in the movement are doing in their communities. So it's rooted in community, and there's variety, there's richness there. It's rooted in caring for ourselves, each other, and the living world. And there's something there about really making that sort of human connection. This is about looking after ourselves and each other. This shows a different future is possible when we come together. Something about unity and strength, and something about the possibilities. And here's how you can be part of it. So one of the things I was saying was end on an invitation. And when you're ending on an invitation, be really clear how people can respond to that invitation. Which, maybe if you're at an initiative level, it might be, this is how you can get involved. It may be, we've been talking in the team about, what might our invitation to politicians be if we were doing some sort of presentation along these lines. We'd like you to be thinking like this when you're making your decisions. We'd like you to go and visit an initiative and see what's happening in your community. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pause there and suggest. The suggestion is that you get into pairs and just spend a bit of time talking about how that feels as a way of telling the transition story. What's your response to that? And it may be that it feels deeply familiar and it's what you're already doing. It may be that it feels, well, who knows how it feels. I want to just acknowledge that it may well already be there. I'm not suggesting it's new to everybody. But I just want to just spend some time in pairs and talk about what does that feel like as a way of telling transition, the story of transition. Having discussed it, would you like to contribute? Yes.
We really liked it and thought it was important to know who our audience is. So maybe this is not exactly what we would say to our local government if we're trying to get a contract. They maybe aren't that interested in the movement that's building. So just thinking about who our audience is. And then another piece, if we are talking to the movement, we want to be inclusive and honor the work that transition is built upon. And something that we've gotten criticism for in the U.S. Is initiatives not honoring the work that's already been happening in their communities. So just making sure we also say a movement is building, it's rooted in all of these things, and it's based on the work that's been done by many other social movements and indigenous communities and all of that.
Nice, thank you. Yes, Caroline.
Another perspective from my U.S. lens too. I kind of miss not stating the problems, and the reason is I like the beginning, starting on a positive note, but I kind of miss that we're not naming things, and how I usually name the problems these days is more personally. Like, I can talk about climate change as the wildfires in California that almost took out one of our colleagues' homes. So, and there's, that sort of thing. So I think not just naming the problems impersonally, but personalizing them, and I'm kind of missing it from my arc of telling my way of telling the transition story. So that's just a piece. But I really like the positive part of this.
We were talking these points through in German. I live in Germany, and it's really interesting how a movement is building in English is a really lovely, beautiful image, but it's really difficult to translate it then into to German. It then becomes really sort of quite like open the drawer, put the thing in, and it's a much sort of tighter box when you translate it. So it's yeah, sometimes lovely ideas, but then how do you get them into your own language? You have to reinvent the language.
Really interesting. Yeah.
What struck us was that in some ways it's about us. It's not actually about you. So it's about what's my interest in you. It's an invitation for them to come and join us. And there's a sort of high vision, caring for ourselves, each other, the living world. But in some ways, what's your problem? Or what is it that's really a preoccupation for you? Am I interested in your story? I don't see that in that yet.
Joe?
Yeah, we had an interesting discussion based on the thing about the problem or not, and I take on board that, but of course there's also, as we've found on the ground in London, when we talk about these things, that there can be a switch off, there can be a turn off, and they can make the leaflets look really bleak and negative, and does it really work, or does it just look a bit apocalyptic? So it's an interesting conflict. I'm not exactly sure what the answer is. And I really smiled and was really pleased by the line of movement it's building, because I think here's a bus, get on it. There's lots of places where you can go to be a bit apocalyptic and negative, and there's plenty of that out there. But the transition town is a place where things are moving and it's happening and it's positive. And I suppose the question is, what is the objective of this? Is it to engage or to inform? Because you're never going to educate people on climate change. Because even the wildfire example, you could argue about that. Is that really climate change? Because there's scientific debates to be had there. But if you just simply say, look, this is what we're doing. Here's the bus. Jump on it. So that's why I like it. That's my kind of perspective on it. And it's the question of is this about engaging or informing? Because the informing maybe has to happen separately.
Thank you.
I think. Sort of forgiven what other people have said, and I like the fact that it starts with a positive, and I think both the strength and weakness of it is that it's quite vague, which means that I suppose you can adapt it to your own story, but I think maybe what other people are saying is that, well, certainly for me, I feel like you need to use that but then provide some really concrete examples. And it's quite interesting for me because I'm very new to transition and I've read bits about it, but before this weekend I was trying to describe to a few people what it is, and I really struggled with that. But it seems, and now I understand why, because it seems like there isn't a very clear definition. So I suppose what it is just being able to talk about these things, but then really kind of zoom in on some really concrete examples, so that it makes it real for people.
Thank you.
I think the lady in the
sorry, there was the lady behind you.
Oh, sorry.
She was for a while.
Actually, you've asked the question I was going to point to. So I'm new to the transition. So again, it's like, well, I'm doing that kind of thing, but I'm not part of transition. So where is the boundary there? So that's interesting. And also, I don't know if this, that I look at it, how do you influence people and how do you motivate people? And often actually having a negative, even though I like the positive, people will actually get motivated more by fear than by the benefits. So I just throw that into the pot.
I'm just going to question a bit whether they actually act as a response to fear, because you can get very stuck in fear, but I'll take the point. Now there was somebody over there who's been waiting for a while. There's Anna and
Hello, I'm really rather excited by this new way of presenting it. Having been in a transition town, small town, Bridport, 13,000 people, it was always a doom story and what does it mean, transition? But we've started, first of all, there are many groups in Bridport doing similar things, but they don't call themselves transition. We have something called Home in Bridport, and we at present have a thing called Our Democracy by citizens of Bridport. Citizens being the key thing, and it's a project that's evolved over 2 years where it's about neighbourliness. and it's about caring for each other and looking at the resources you have. We're a fertile area, we can grow our food, we're changing small schools so they cook their own food. And the key role of the arts in expressing this and explaining this.
Thank you. Thanks. And Anna and Josué?
I think this is really, really lovely, but I also have a worry, which is that it's very broad, which is what you said behind before. We need the 12 steps, and we need the principles as a support for this. What we hear a lot in the hubs now, and with the Swedish international hubs, in the hubs meeting, is hub members from some countries that will say that, oh yes, and we have hundreds of initiatives that are transition, but they don't know it. And actually, without sounding too harsh now, I want to be a bit provoking. If you don't know that you are a transition initiative, then basically you aren't. You need to look on to the movement in order to be a part of it. And we can't cast the net so wide that you'd start talking about. Sweden has already this tendency. We had a centre party, which is sort of left of right. I don't know how to express that. It's probably left of your left, even if we consider it a middle-of-the-road party. But suddenly the minister there stood up and started talking about green transition, grön omställning, because we are called omställning in Sweden, not transition, even if we are transition. It's a translation. So suddenly we find ourselves in a position where we have become successful at doing this together, and other people are suddenly hijacking our name. And so what does that mean? That means that suddenly we are like sustainable development. It could be anything, you know, and it's not anything. It's very, very special, and we have to hold that between us.
Thanks, Anna. Josué?
I'm Josué from Belgium. What I observe in Belgium is that there is a part of the people which are in transition who, maybe in the French context more deeply, more widely, there is a buzz around the idea of a collapse at the moment. And there are people who will say that we are in denial if we are speaking like this. And at the same time, I know that there are other people which will say, which will left immediately if we speak of collapse. So I'm balancing, well, what do I do between this and this idea of collapse? Because some are coming to us because of this idea of resilience, this idea of scenarios, and if there is a collapse, we will be more ready than if we don't do that. And well, so I'm searching the balance. I don't know quite well.
I just wanted to, because I sort of start to use this already in some of the talks that I give, and I don't think it means, for me, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you don't talk about the challenges anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what I do is it means I change the sequence in which I present it. So I used to be, any of those of you who saw talks I gave 4 or 5 years ago, the first 20 minutes was lots of graphs that either did that or did that. and actually I don't do that anymore. You know, if you can come straight in with the kind of, this is fantastic, this is happening. And one of the things for me that's missing from that is something about, that roots it in place, that roots it in local. You were saying what's distinct about transition, and one of the things for me that's distinct is that's where it starts. It starts on the streets, like the story that we saw. It starts in the neighbourhoods, in the communities, in the place. But actually once you've kind of, for me, actually those challenges and the solutions to them come through the stories that you then tell. So I tell stories about places that are, in the session, the next session, some of those stories are about places that are doing renewable energy, that are doing local food, and that stuff comes through in the stories that you tell about what people are doing. It's about renewable energy, it's about community ownership, it's about local food, healthy food, it's about putting health and care in the centre of what we do. All of that stuff comes through in stories, but for me one of the key things here is it's that shift away from needing to start it by saying we do it in response. And actually when I talked at the permaculture conference in London a couple of weeks ago and said that thing about we don't need to frame all this stuff as a response anymore, because actually what transition groups and permaculture and the movement of people doing this stuff around the world are doing is fantastic. It doesn't need to have this kind of upfront excuse. We do this because of this. Actually, we do it because it's fantastic. And we do it because it meets the needs of the places where we live much better than any other things that people have come up with, certainly anything that our governments and local governments have come up with. And that, for me, in terms of, I find, in terms of presenting transition, there's a real kind of shift there, and it makes it much more accessible to more people because they get this sort of, yeah, fantastic. Right, that's just my... So it's not that we airbrush that stuff out, it's just that we bring it in later, and we bring it in almost kind of more implicitly than having to just sort of stamp it all over everything.
And one of the things, just to, I'll come from, I can see lots more people wanting to talk. One of the things that we actually did, and I deliberately missed it out of this one, was that we put in here, this is why it's needed. And we put it in as a sort of optional, because when it was responding to that somebody said early on, it sort of depends on your audience and what they, what will engage with them. And the question, I think, that's still with us is, and then is this the point where we do really need to demonstrate why it's needed? This is why we think it matters. Or is it more skillful that it's implicit in the stories? And actually, one of the things we've been talking about, can we make those stories speak to the really sort of basic human instinct that we want to live better, more social, more connected lives? And actually, if we speak to that, people really recognise it and respond.
I couldn't see which level you put it in because of where you were standing.
Sorry. So we put it in the penultimate. So
yes,
here.
I just wondered whether it was actually one stage further up.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Yeah, I think that, yeah, good question. Yeah, but we were certainly recognising it as something that needed to come later rather than bang, that's where we have to go in on. And that question of how you told it. And I just want to respond to a couple of other things that were being said. I mean, one of the things we've been talking about with this piece is, this is about how do you entice people in? How do you get people feeling this is something I want to be involved in? I wanted to respond to what Anna was saying, that, and then there needs to be more. So this ending with an invitation also needs to lead to, and there's, there are principles under here, there's some real models here that can help you do this stuff. And that sort of question of how you skillfully do that is, I think, really interesting as well. So I'm seeing lots of people want to talk about that. I'm going to try and pick up people who haven't spoken yet. Yes?
Just going back to, I really like the kind of positive start, and I agree that starting with a 20-minute kind of doom and gloom talk on climate change can be off-putting, but I think this story to me lacks the urgency, and even though it sounds kind of very nice, and yes, okay, I'd like to take part, without that kind of like, this is what we're going to do, we're going to act, we're going to do stuff now, and this is really exciting. I just don't feel like I'd kind of jump up and start doing something with that description somehow. Yeah.
Thank you. Danielle?
Yeah, this is great, this stuff. I mean, for me, as a transitioner, that would be for people who might know about transition, might want to be involved, not sure about, have all those questions. For me, the storytelling thing, and I love all the stories that you're telling, and those are absolutely key, but for me, the storytelling thing has to go further. It has to go further in that we have to reach beyond this -1% of the population. I mean, we're not reaching enough people, and I've said it before, I know, I'm deeply concerned about that. And what I would like to do is to send out an invitation, find ways of sending out invitation to people who might be partially awakened or who know that things are looking pretty bad and want to do something about it but don't know where to go. And that needs another way. I don't want to minimize any of that because it's totally valid, but maybe deeper way of I mean, I have suggestions for that. I'm not going to go into that now, but a deeper way of touching people's imagination, touching their hearts immediately like that, rather than saying you could do this or you could do that, or there's these wonderful schemes in Brussels and you Totnes and anywhere else, which there are. But it's another way of touching people, and I think we need, that's what I'm trying to work on.
Okay, thank you.
Just telling stories.
Thank you. Over here and then here.
I think when you say a movement is building, actually lots of movements are building, and they in response to, actually they are in response to economic and climate, economic problems, climate change, political problems. And I think to say a movement is building is missing a trick, because actually what we want to do is link up with the other movements. We want to make it more inclusive. How can we say, look, there's a movement, I don't know how we can say it. Transition is one of those movements. And we can actually, transition can help you do some of the things you're trying to do. So come in, if you're another movement, please, we love you, come in. We'll work with you. That's what we want to do, don't we? And at the bottom it says, here's how you can be part of it. Can it not say, transition can help you build more resilient communities, do this, bring your community groups together. We want to be saying what we can do to help people, to bring people in, so it becomes meaningful for them. Because here's how you can be part of it. I need more than that, if that makes sense.
And just as we talk, I just want to emphasise this isn't designed to be, this is what you would say. It's about, this is the sort of flow of the story as you would tell it. But thank you, because there's some interesting stuff there.
It's relevant to everything. We mustn't forget all the other movements that are doing all this good work.
And it's interesting hearing so many of the debates that we've been having within the team about exactly that sort of the strength of saying a movement is building, and the potential sort of isolationist approach of that is one of the things that we've been talking about. Now, there were lots of people already. Do you not want to speak now? You went next. Yeah.
Asaf from Israel, and I don't want to be negative
Okay.
or pessimist, but I don't think that I'm convinced myself in the story of resilience is fun. In Israel, it's very hard to take, it's like the local story, but it's very hard to take the people out of their ordinary life and to cling it only on fun. I'm missing something. And there I can put the crisis. For me, it's the conflict or the story of the gap between cultures, but I need something, and just I'm really connected to fantastic, but I can't really show it to others. Really, it's not easy. So
Thank you. Thanks. Yes.
I think, and you may already be doing this, but considering that you put out framing and resources for a lot of groups and folks in the movement to use for ourselves and also to reach other people, of that having the audience, I'd love to even hear from you the different audiences that you think, but I think there's some commonality around audiences we're trying to reach around the world, from people just waking up to people who are engaged, to partners in different movements, to government agencies. And so that's one thing of just, and what's the common language? There's different ways we need to communicate to each audience, and there's commonalities that can communicate across them. And then the other thing that I think you do really effectively, Rob, and Anna in her facilitation, is what are effective ways to communicate things in general, being able to express your emotions well. And there's some just different tools that I think, there's the story, but how we communicate effectively is as critical as whatever the thing we're trying to communicate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if this is going out as like an A for people, there needs to be a parallel story in that, in the audience. What's the experience they're going through? So what's the rapport? So you get real empathy there. So really at the beginning, you're just making a relationship with them. Don't even try and start your story. Yeah, just build a relationship with your audience. And so a movement is built. I'm getting the assumption I'm getting from this is for people right at the very early stages of doing transition. They're trying to form an initiating group or something. So maybe you've not got your own personal project to talk about. But as soon as you do, talk about your own project, build up your own credibility with the crowd, which is really important with the British audience, and have it and let the project speak for itself. And then understand. So I have no problem bringing in the deep context issues later on, because I know I've got warmed up crowd. I operate in a very conservative part of the country. It's this countryside around here, and I know if I go straight with climate change, I've got resistance. Yeah, if I sort of slip in, and the great thing about this time is seriously significantly reducing our carbon emissions, which is sorting out climate change. I just say on assumption that the whole of our society is on the script with climate change now. I don't give them the space to even debate it, because I don't create space for conversation on whether climate change is happening or not. I don't think that's our role. We engage with people that want to do something about it. So that's the reason for it to come in later. So really just choose your moment when you feel the crowd is warmed up enough to receive that. Go with it. Yeah, just challenge them little by little. So wherever is the appropriate place to just drop in a little bit of depth or challenge with your crowd. That's what I'd say.
And there was a direct response from Anna, and then somebody next to her, yeah?
Yeah, there you start touching on something that's actually you can cast much wider if you go internationally, because this is also a cultural thing of how you develop interests. Not everyone are open to being served stories. There are certain cultures that are more inquisitive and need to find their own way. I used to market stuff to tourists of different nationalities around Europe, and you can't sell a package to a Danish person with activities that they have to do because they don't want to buy that. They want to buy dinner and they want to buy somewhere to sleep. But then you have to make sure that there is provision for finding these things that the Danes want to find, off the beaten track. So you sort of direct them towards the sea, because there's a lovely walk, and then you know that there so happens to be the only restaurant in the whole area that's open, and they will go and eat there. So you can basically calculate. I'm saying that there are different ways of serving the customer, and you might need a program where you discover for yourself these things, almost like laying out a trail that you can follow instead of being told in that way.
Thank you. Yes?
Hi, I'm a complete newbie to everything. So I just heard transition top left, and it sounded like 2 T's, and it's like, that's nice. But I don't know what it meant at all. I'm here because a friend of mine's working here, so I've come with my kids. So, hi. So, this is really exciting for me. 4 years ago, my husband and I separated. I realised I'd been trying to slot myself into a particular way of behaving for far too long, and now I'm like rediscovering myself and what I want to do with the world and my skills. And to see a movement is building is really exciting, because I've been doing a lot of voluntary work and I do a lot of care work and so on and so forth. Working in festivals and stuff like that, where you have a community pop up and everybody's like, yeah, look at this, we've all got together and we're all hanging out and it's really cool, and it seems, obviously, it's the same thing here, and people are motivated and wanting to do stuff. And to see a movement is building is lovely, and it's like, for me, it's like a movement is building, you've felt it, or you're looking for it, one or the other. I think that's what most people are doing. If I talk to my next door neighbours, who are all grandmas, I'm surrounded by grandmas who've all lost their husbands, and they keep an eye out for me and my kids, and they're saying about a loss of community, and wouldn't it be nice if we could all get, this sort of thing. Sorry, I'm being really vague and really random. But, and also, like I say, when you're kind of like going along, for instance, volunteering at festivals, people are talking about that sense of community, and that's really exciting. And this shows a different future. I do know a bit about green issues. I'm not saying that I'm the world's most amazing person about it, but we're all, not only the people who are obviously educated about it, but people who are not educated about it have got that language, and they're aware of a different future. So there's a mass acceptance of that and what that different future is going to be, and it doesn't have to be the way that it's been written by Philip K. Dick and Arthur C. Clarke about doomsday and moving into da-da-da-da and so on and so forth. It can be, and this is the alternative, guys, for Little Miss Nobody knows no for nothing. One thing that I want to do is, one of the skills I've got is I'm a masseur, and I'm also aware of the fact that the homelessness issue in Exeter has gone up again by like 42% or something like that in like the past year. One of the things that I was hoping to do is actually see if there's a way of actually offering massage for people who are homeless. So it's like, how would that happen? And I've heard about the wellbeing centre that's supposed to be starting up and things like that. So again, it's like volunteering my time. So yeah, just as a complete newbie, this is really exciting.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. And I feel like we're hearing some of the stuff that that Hal was speaking to about actually first build the relationship. And I wanted to pick up on something that somebody else said earlier about the fact that some of the most effective transition initiative communications that I've seen and sort of engagement with the wider community that I've seen has not been about going out saying, you know, this is what we're doing, come and join us. It's been about what are you doing, what interests you, what's already happening here, how can we help, how can we support it, how can we fit what we're doing with what you're doing. I can see faces in this room that are doing some really skillful work around that, and that, for me, that when you're actually building things on a community level, that's probably the only way it can work. I think one of the questions about this for us is then how do you speak about this to the world? So that the visibility, because one of the frustrations with transition is these fantastic things are happening locally and it's not very visible. So and one of the things that Transition Network is asked by transition initiatives is make this more visible, tell people about it. So that question of how can we get this out there in the mainstream in a way that then supports and reinforces that skillful engagement that's happening at a community level. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, I'm going to come here first, and then there's others to speak. Yeah, in the green.
Stefan, Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Some of us, this is a suggestion, are shopkeepers, massage people that already have a clientele of reliable customers that trust us.
Speak up a bit, please.
Oh, sorry. This is a suggestion for people that are shopkeepers or massage therapists or anyone in the service that already has a clientele that trusts them, and they built this relationship, and you don't have the time to go through a verbal explanation of what transition towns are. So I have people come into my shop and I wait on them and there's someone right behind them. So I might have a single sheet of paper with these proposed story flow tailored to your clientele or your customer that would perhaps stimulate them to visit transitionus.org or transitionnetwork.org. So it's another way of trying to bring people into the flock. It's not just taking possibly a good 20 minutes.
Thank you.
Just a suggestion.
And I'm seeing lots of people wanting to speak, so I'm going to just invite you just to breathe for a second. Because there's a lot going on here, isn't there? Just breathe. And when you speak, I'm going to ask you to just think about what's the essence that I want to contribute to this discussion, so that we get some beautiful little contributions. And I'm not wanting to say that to close people down, so who was wanting to speak? Joe?
Just, yeah, I'm almost contradicting my earlier point, but if you leave out climate change, or you really play it down a lot, at what point do you bring it back in? And if you bring it in too late, has the person or even the organisation already contracted into what they perceive as transition without really thinking about those issues at all? And then it can be quite difficult, like, 6 months later, oh, by the way, we do climate change as well. You go, well, we're doing all this stuff, so you can, so, and I've seen that a little bit, and I've seen it in some of our subgroups that are quite successful, so it's just a question, really. So if you leave it out completely, it's harder to get it in later. Although I haven't said that if people aren't ready for it, I've also seen examples where people who definitely weren't ready for it get involved in like craft projects and then 6 months later turn around and say, I want to join your carbon conversation group. And they're like, wow, that woman was not interested at all at the start, and now she wants to join quite a very environmentally geared group. So there's that, at what point do you bring it in? And if you bring it in too late, the idea of contract, so they've contracted to do something that isn't to do with environmentalism perhaps, so there's that, just that issue really, just one of the...
So I'll be brief. Rob, I came 6 years ago, saw your charts, and I've been with transition ever since. So I'm a great believer in telling why we're onto this.
Yeah.
The problems have not gone away. The problems are as or even greater. That's point number one. Point number two is to this lady. I've let some of our projects go. They want to be independent of transition. I haven't got a problem with that. They're still working in the community. But I don't think we should be afraid to say, if you're not part of transition, you're not transition. They definitely are these projects.
Thank you. Yes,
I'm just concerned about the living world having been slightly downgraded. I'm very interested in caring for community and each other, but it's very human-centric, and the living world seems to have almost slipped off the agenda, which worries me. I mean, there's the soil culture exhibition on at the moment. I mean, it's the International Year of the Soil. We rely so much on our environment. I feel it's slightly slipped off the agenda, which is worrying me. I know it can be brought in our projects, but the emphasis has shifted hugely.
These are two good points. First, I was a bit surprised not to see resilience in the story, but then thinking about it, of course, resilience is a complicated word. You have to have, you seem very smart when you talk about resilience to somebody that doesn't know it, so it's very good not to have put resilience in it. And second thing, I love the third sentence. I think it's really new to directly say, okay, this is about caring for ourselves, each other, and a living world. Well, for my Belgian culture, I think this is new and this is huge.
You've been waiting for a while, haven't you? And Tracy, sorry.
So for me, this approach overall is not immediate, urgent, addressing the real stuff enough. And on the other side, doing that, and on the other side with this approach, it calls people in. They don't go, no. And so it actually can speed up the momentum, but it's a risk. It's an unknown trade-off. It's got to have both in there. This and
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tracy.
I like it. Two things I'd like to say. The first one is, I think that's how people perceive us, people who want to get involved. At least in my experience, people who are trying to work with us now, this is why they're trying to work with us, because this is what they see. So I think in a sense, maybe, from my point of view, it feels like you've told a story that somebody else is seeing, which is maybe, that's great. I think if we want to use this story, I think we need to start it with something else, which is recognising the commonality of, you mentioned that we started with climate change and peak oil, and we started to talk about economic issues. We talk about democracy issues in Hungary, and we use that as a framework. Not by saying we have all these global problems, but by saying our communities are being affected by many, many different things, which is making life difficult. And then, in a sense, that means we're sort of giving a buy-in to people who feel as though they're affected by something. I personally couldn't start with this sentence, which a movement is building, because people wouldn't know if we were the evangelists or the, God knows what, really. So I need, for me to use this, I need a sentence at the beginning, which gives me a link to others as well.
And I'm going to come to you. I am going to wrap this up in a minute, because we've got 15 minutes to use before the end, so we'll just think about how we use that.
So one comment, just think about how to make it more visible. Immediately I just thought of the principle show, don't tell, and the power of imagery, and then thought, should we be asking the question, how do we tell our story, or how do we show our story, and just thinking about how powerful imagery is.
We've got 15 minutes left. What we were going to suggest, because I can see there's more people wanting to talk. I'm aware there's only so much you can take in when we're talking like this in a big group. I was going to suggest that we just go back into maybe fours rather than pairs this time, and talk about what are the questions for you, maybe after this workshop, or what are the questions that remain for you about how best to communicate transition? Just to talk about that in a smaller group, rather than trying to carry on this big conversation. I mean, this is obviously not the end of a process, this is an ongoing discussion. Does that feel useful? I'm getting sort of slightly dodgy looks there. Some people saying, Hal really wants to say something. Go on, you
really
say it.
I'm sorry. It's a bit what I often observe as soon as, and this does not transition, it's everything. As soon as you start talking about communications, you're tripped into a process of completely reviewing your whole objectives, organisational directive, raison d'etre and everything like that. So I think it's really important to realise what we're talking about here is way we're engaging with people. So when I see that referred to the living world, I don't see that we're underplaying the reason, but we're drawn to this from climate change or biodiversity crisis or people or anything. It's a way to articulate it to a certain crowd. So I think that's really important. We have to keep reminding ourselves, we're not reviewing the whole reason for doing this. How do we engage with people quickly to start a conversation? And to start a conversation, not to end the conversation, to keep that conversation going as long as you can. Because the longer you have a conversation, the more likely you are to reach people. Yeah, so.
So I'm going to suggest you just get into fours and just have a further conversation. Take this conversation on. If you're attracted to this or a version of this, a different version of this, join all of that because it felt like there was lots of interesting stuff being discussed there. Is there anything that somebody feels really moved to, if you've had a real insight that you feel like you want to bring? Or was the small group discussion enough for you? Any last insights? Yeah?
My sense is you have to ask who you're speaking to, and if you're actually focused on winning over the opposition, your friends will come along automatically. You don't have to worry about them. They'll show up for the meetings. But you have to frame the language in a way that's accessible, and the only way you get to that is by listening. To be able to speak in the language that they're speaking in, speak to them in their own terms, find out what their inner desires are, and how what you're talking about is not any different. It just has to be framed in that language.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
I just would say that for me it's more important to speak from the heart and from something that excites me and makes me want to move than to be in this or in another one. If I speak from my heart, people will have, well, I think it's clear now.
Thank you. Thank you.
The product is more important than the marketing.
Nice. Nice.
Well, the product is the marketing, it's not the product is also marketing, is it?
The key thing for me about transition is that it's principles based and that we're working from principle as opposed to financial or different sorts of thing. And I'd like that word in there somehow.
I think this is really useful from a kind of presentation point of view, but we still need the elevator pitch, the tagline for what are you doing this weekend? Where are you? We're going to transition conference. Okay, what is it? For that.
Well, how nice that you said that. I'm just going to leave one with you because we didn't bring this in earlier. Oh yeah, actually, Rob's just going to say a few things, and then I'm going to leave one with you that we didn't bring in before because we thought we'll all obsess about the words. So a few things.
Well, I just had two thoughts actually that kind of came out of a couple of questions. That there was that idea about urgency. I think you mentioned urgency. That in order to have urgency, putting the problems up front really helps to generate the sense of urgency. I mean, actually, my experience has been that doing it this way around, there's no loss in urgency. That actually the urgency comes through in the passion and the spirit and the heart of the stories. And the urgency, there is still a real sense of urgency that comes through. So for me, making that shift, there is no loss of urgency. And then when you talked about fun and saying, well, the only way we can sell this is on fun, and for me that kind of misses the point. Because this isn't about fun, actually, although it's fun as well.
It's fantastic.
Fantastic. Because actually what a lot of the stories, and certainly in the session after this, the stories that I'll tell that we've pulled out for this 21 stories, fun is one strand of it. There's all the other strands about people coming together, people starting new livelihoods, people seeing the world around them starting to change, building new connections. There's a whole range of other strands that run inside this alongside fun, because it feels like fun sort of trivialises it, but actually there's a real kind of rich mixture of motivations that go way, way, way beyond that.
Thank you, and thanks, Rob. And I'm going to just leave you. And as I say, we didn't put this up earlier because it's back to this isn't about marketing. This is about sort of really principles and something more deep. But we thought we'd just leave this with you as a statement, one possible statement. We've been using it on the postcards that you might have seen in the refectory. So this is what we're currently playing with. A movement of communities coming together to reimagine and rebuild our world. And it is not perfect, and some people might hate it. And I'm not going to open a debate. Okay.